Hello, I am Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. In today's class, we'll go through the psychology being investigated and background of the Perry et al. Study. So, in the first part of the video, I will explain these concepts to you, and in the second part, we will do some answer writing practice according to board format for some of the past paper questions and some practice questions on this section. So, first, I'll explain these concepts to you. As you know, psychology being investigated can be asked in the paper for 4 or 5 marks if they ask you the entire psychology, or it can be asked for any of the 2 marks concepts which are there within psychology. Now, in Perry et al. Study, it has been made clear in the syllabus that they want 3 concepts: interpersonal distance, empathy, and social hormones. This you have to prepare from a descriptive point of view, AO1, not AO3 evaluation. You will not be asked to give strengths or weaknesses of any of these concepts. So just make sure that for each of the concepts you can define it and give some elaboration or some example of that concept. That will suffice for both 2 markers also and 4 or 5 markers also. And mentally you can prepare an outline in your mind. If they are asking you for a 4 or 5 marks Perry et al. Answer, I'm not saying that this is the only way in which you can write, but if you follow what I'm going to explain now, then this outline will help you. You need to first cover the concept of interpersonal distance, within which you need to define this concept, and you need to give Hall's theory of 4 zones of interpersonal distance, each of which you can describe in about 2 words. Next, you need to cover empathy. Within that, you can give a definition of empathy and also define 2 types of empathy: cognitive and affective. And then you need to talk about social hormones, within which you need to define what oxytocin is, and you need to explain its role in social interaction or social bonding. It is not advisable to try to memorize an entire section that is there in front of you. There's no need to word memorize anything, nor is it possible. But what you can remember is an outline like this, which I have written here. That also you won't have to put much effort into remembering once you've understood the concepts. You can just have this outline in your mind. As you know, in the psychology paper, you have very little time to think about one thing that you need to write. Time allocated for every question is quite less. So if you have an outline ready in your mind, you know quickly what you need to write, and because you've understood the concepts, you don't have to think too much, or you don't have to think what you've like rote learned. You haven't rote learned, so you don't need to remember word to word what the concept is. In your mind it comes, okay, first I need to define interpersonal space, then in your own words whatever you've understood you can write that. Next, in the outline, you know you have to give Hall's 4 zones, so whatever you've understood in that you can write that. So the outline just primes you for what you need to write in the answer, and then from your own understanding you can write whatever you have learned. So this outline will help you for Perry et al. Psychology investigated. Now I'll explain these concepts to you. The first concept is interpersonal distance. Interpersonal distance just means that whenever we interact with others in person, that is when they are physically present in front of us, we have this imaginary space or boundary around us which we do not like them to exceed or cross. So that is personal space or interpersonal distance. It is some space around us on all 4 sides, like we like to reserve for ourselves. We don't like anyone coming that close to us. Here it has been defined as the physical space we like to maintain between ourselves and others. So it's a very simple definition. But as we would expect, this is complicated by many factors. If I was to ask you how much space you like to maintain between yourself and others, the first thing you would tell me is depends on who the other person is. So, firstly, if it is a friend or a very close family member or someone, we don't mind being close to them. So, the space we maintain with them tends to be less. But what if it is a stranger whom you've never seen before? Then you'd like them to be a little further away. So personal space is dependent on factors such as the relationship that you share with the other person, which I have just discussed, cultural norms, which culture you have been born and brought up in. If you've been brought up in a culture in which it is usually the collectivist type of culture where it is normal to be very close to others, hugging, touching is also acceptable amongst close people, then you might not have much of a personal space that you like to maintain. But if you've been born and brought up in a culture in which touching is not considered appropriate, privacy is given a lot of respect, and like it's considered to be an intrusion to go too close to somebody or like touch them without their permission, in that case you would like to maintain more space from others. And of course what matters is personal factors, mainly personal preferences. Regardless of which culture you are born in or what relationship you share with another person, you would definitely have your own preference as to you like others coming close to you or you don't like it. It is a matter of personal liking also. Like you'll see some people, if you touch them, they could get very irritated. They try to wipe off the touch that you have done. It's absolutely unacceptable to them that anyone should come so close to them. Whereas others are very free. They will come from front very close to you and they'll hug you freely or they'll touch you also. That is how close they can come to you. So everyone has their own attitude towards personal touch. Now, what we need to know is, considering that personal space is dependent on a lot of factors, a researcher named Hall, and here we should remember his name, I strongly recommend that. He has presented a theory which is called four zones of interpersonal distance. He has identified that there are four levels of distances, or four types or lengths of distances that people like to maintain from others depending on what relationship they share with them. You need to know the exact names of these four zones, so you cannot write whichever name you please. You must remember the name which has been given by Hall. So one is intimate distance, the other is personal distance, third is social, and fourth is public distance. So the names you need to know exactly, but within the names you can describe these distances in your own words, and they're very simple to understand also. No matter which textbook you are referring to, you will find a diagram of Hall's interpersonal distances, which makes it easier to understand. I would recommend that you definitely take a look at that diagram. I think in Professor Roberts' book and the Cambridge textbook, as far as I remember, it's there in the Perry et al. Study itself. In the Hodder textbook, I don't think it is there. But if you look a little ahead in the A2 syllabus, where you have consumer psychology or organizational psychology, Hall's theory is covered in those topics also. So if you just browse a little forward into the pages, definitely somewhere you'll find the diagram, regardless of which textbook or revision guide you're referring to. Here I'll make a very rough diagram for understanding. If this stick figure represents an individual, so imagine yourself as the stick figure. Firstly, you have around you one zone of personal space which is called intimate distance. This is the least distance you like to maintain from others, or you can think of it as the closest you would allow anyone to be. So, this is called intimate distance. And now you can think of whom you would allow to come this close to you to enter into your intimate space. Definitely, you would allow your family members to be here. Those family members who you feel very close to, not just about any family member, those whom you share a close relationship with. Maybe you'd allow even your friends whom you feel very close to, again like your best friends, to enter this space. So this is known as intimate distance. It's meant for close family members or intimate partners, as Hall has described. Then there is personal distance. We are imagining these spaces as concentric circles because they are all around you. So you can imagine the next level, which is a little further away from intimate distance. This is your personal distance. So this is that space which is not very close to, it's little further away from your intimate distance. Think whom you would like to enter this space. You would like maybe your acquaintances to be at that distance from you. You wouldn't like them to come as close as your intimate distance. So your acquaintances or family members whom you're not that close to, but of course you know them well, you would like them to be at a personal distance space. Let's say, for example, your intimate distance is like one palm space. So you like your best friends or your family, closest family members to come there. And then say your personal distance is at an arm's length. So whom you would like to enter there? Your acquaintances. Of course, it's very subjective. See, everyone has these zones. Just remember that all of us have these intimate personal distance zones and all. It has been verified in a lot of research. But exactly what is the spacing which makes for someone's intimate space? For me, it could be a palm's length. For someone else, it could be an arm's length. So if I'm the one, like we've seen, it's a matter of personal preference. If I'm the one who likes to be very close to others, so maybe a palm's distance or even a finger's distance is good for me. But someone in general who likes to maintain a lot of space, for them an arm's length might be there, even for intimate people, for closer people. So the overall distance increases for someone who doesn't like people coming close to them, and the overall distance narrows for someone who likes people coming close to them. Regardless, but everyone has these four distances, means everyone considers what type of relation they share with someone else, and accordingly they have space. That's what Hall is saying. So as we've just seen, personal distance is for everyday interactions. You can think of it as it is for acquaintances. Social distance is for formal interactions. This is a further away concentric circle in the diagram. So say you want to have an interaction with like they've said, formal interaction. So say if you're a business person, working person, with a business partner, you need to have an interaction. Or if you're a student, in that case you're working on some group project, so you need to interact with a classmate who's working on the same project. Or even the teacher, she's holding a meeting with all of you all, with the group, and you all are going to discuss the project. So this is the type of distance you'd like to maintain, which will be further away from personal distance. Because with acquaintances you're going to have informal interaction, so you don't mind them coming closer into the personal distance space. But when it comes to official interaction, you'd like to maintain it a little further away, because it's going to be formal discussion, not personal. Then coming to public distance. Public distance is what you maintain from public figures like lecturers. It's more of a concept you would understand at university, because most of you are going to schools where you're very close to the teacher. Still, if you notice, when the teacher is just lecturing you or just explaining the chapter to you, at that time, like when she's not coming to check what you're working or not coming to talk to you, at that time she stands at the dais in front of the class. In some cases she has a mic, or she's just standing in front of you. So whoever the first bencher is in your class, she does maintain a good distance from that person also, from those students also sitting right at the first row. So that distance which she's maintaining when she's just teaching and addressing the whole class, that is public distance. Other examples include uh, maybe you're listening to a seminar on, say, psychology, stress management or something. So seminars which are held in your school from time to time. Or maybe you're listening to a politician's speech or something. So any type of speech that you're attending, seminar, or a general like large level lecture, public lectures in your community, in those cases the speaker and you, because you don't have any interaction as such, it's more of a one way conversation, you maintain a lot of distance from each other. That is known as social distance. In my outline which I had given, I have not included the purpose of personal space. Why it's an important concept? Because it is optional. If you want to write about it, you can. I'm explaining it right now, but it's not very important to be included in the paper. Why is personal space important? Like, why are we studying these concepts? Even if you don't intend to write in the paper, I would still recommend you know about it, because otherwise psychology feels very boring when you just learn the concepts technically just for writing in the paper. From that point of view, if you think of the concepts and what they actually mean and what role they play in your life, then you will develop motivation to learn the subject, even if you don't intend to pursue it for your career. Why are we learning about personal space? Because it is important to all of us. Imagine someone enters your personal space. Like we've just seen what is intimate distance. Say someone starts intruding into intimate distance. You're just walking on the street and there's a stranger, never seen this person before, coming and literally sticking to you and walking with you. How do you feel at that time? Some of you may have experienced this, or you can imagine how scary it would be to have someone that close to you. A space which you have reserved only for your closest people, an absolute stranger is coming into that space. So, when personal space is invaded or intruded, we feel very threatened, we feel very uncomfortable, and that is why it is important to understand this concept. Why it matters to humans, why is it so important that we maintain these distances, and what are the factors which are playing a role in helping us maintain these distances. If I ask you why it's important, of course, you'd say you don't know what are the stranger's intentions. Why is he coming that close? And how can I allow him to come that close? What if he attacks on me? So, we all understand intuitively why it is important. So, what are the factors which are helping us maintain this personal space? And how these like factors combine together to help us to maintain the space and how they protect us from potential danger. This study is along those lines. So that's the larger purpose of this study, as we will understand slowly. Okay, so in interpersonal distance, I just reiterate, you need to know the definition and you need to know perfectly the name of hall, the name of the four personal zones, space zones which is given, and you need to be able to define these zones in one or two words, just like they have given over here. Now let's understand the next concept which is relevant to personal space and this study, which is called empathy. Most of you must have already done the Baron Cohen study at this point because it comes earlier in the cognitive approach. Empathy you have seen under theory of mind, and you must understand that empathy refers to being able to see another person's perspective. It's a key trait or a key concept in psychology. It matters a lot in social relationships. When I ask students what empathy is, generally they tell me it is being able to put oneself in another person's shoes, which is absolutely correct. A simple example is, supposing you and your friend both have done poorly in the term exams. Now, you might be feeling absolutely okay about not doing well because, say, you have a different, larger goal. You just want to pass the exams. You're not aiming for very high grades. You have some other plans in life which are not dependent on high grades. But your friend is really depending on getting high grades because she wants admission to a particular university which it is difficult to get into. Now, if you can understand this, firstly, that she must be feeling bad about the results which have come. After all, she's your friend. You've been interacting with her since so many years. So, even without her having to tell you, you should be able to recognize that she must not be feeling good at this time. And secondly, if you can understand why she's feeling that way, because grades matter to her, they are important for her goals in life, then you're being empathetic. In Baron Cohen's study, we've seen this is also called theory of mind, realizing that others think differently and being able to decipher why they are thinking that way. So, that is what empathy is. Here, it has been defined as being able to understand and share the feelings of others. Looking at this definition, then there are two parts to empathy or two types of empathy. One is the understanding part, the other is sharing the feelings part. When you can understand, simply perceive or recognize, like just identify what the other person is feeling. Like in the example I gave, just identifying that my friend must be sad at this time. That is known as cognitive empathy. As you know, cognitive always has to do anything with thinking. So, cognitive empathy is just being able to name the emotion that the other person must be experiencing, just understanding that. Affective empathy is being able to feel the same emotion as the other person. Say, when you think about my friend must be sad right now, and you were okay, your mood was neutral, but now your mood starts dipping. You also start feeling a little sad, disappointed. You wish it was not that way. You wish things were different, like she would have scored well. You're feeling for, I wish she would have scored well. I wish she wasn't so sad right now. And you also start feeling that sadness in you. That is when you have affective empathy, when you experience the same emotion as the other person. Affect stands for emotion as such, emotion or feeling. So, affective empathy is emotional empathy. Now, why is this important to interpersonal space? Because as we will see soon, and if you've seen Perry et al. Study already, you must have seen empathy is a key determining factor in how much personal space we like to maintain from others. It's very generalized what I'm going to say now because we're going to say it in a more nuanced manner ahead. But generally, it is found people who are high on empathy, who easily feel empathy for others, they are the ones who like to be closer to others. They like to maintain less space from others, notwithstanding other factors right now. I'm just giving you a general statement. And those who are low on empathy, who don't identify much with others, they like to maintain more distance from others. From a paper point of view, what you need to write from this, as per the outline, what I had mentioned, definition, and the definition of the two types of empathy. That's all. Whatever else I'm explaining is just for your understanding. Finally, we have to be able to talk about social hormones. Here we have to memorize the name of a hormone which is given oxytocin. Firstly, I'm sure you've learned in biology, even if you've done it very basically, hormones are chemicals that are released in the body by the endocrine system, those small organs which are there. One such hormone is oxytocin, that's the name of it. It's actually a neurohormone, though it's not mentioned that way in the syllabus. A neurohormone is a chemical which plays a dual role. It's found in your brain also, it's a neurotransmitter. It is being released by some neurons in the brain, and it's also a hormone because it's also being released by some of the endocrine glands. So, oxytocin, you might see in your textbook, they're switching between calling it a neurotransmitter and a hormone because actually it plays both roles. It is both. It is classified into both types of chemical. We don't need to know that technically, we need to know why it is a social hormone. Functionally, the purpose it serves is in social interaction. That's why it's called social hormone. It basically plays a role in social bonding. These chemicals which are there in the body, they are correlates of many behaviors. When you engage in some behaviors on the outside, there are some chemicals which are releasing in your body at the same time. You can think of it as these chemicals are enabling you to do certain behaviors, or you can think of it that they are correlates. They just release at the same time that you're doing those behaviors. So, whatever it is, when people engage in social interaction, such as social bonding, just talking to others, laughing with them, doing some common activity, or even in very special type of social behaviors, like really close ones. Childbirth, when a mother is literally delivering the child, it's found oxytocin is being released in the body, which help her in her uterus contractions to deliver the child. And also breastfeeding, when the mother is feeding the child, one of the closest possible social bonding which is there, that time also oxytocin is being released in the mother's body. So whenever we engage in any type of social behavior, if we are to scan our bodies at that time, we will find there is a release more than usual of oxytocin. That is why it is considered that oxytocin promotes pro-social behaviors. It plays a role in uh, helping you to interact with others. Pro-social behaviors are any positive behaviors that you have with other people. Sometimes also called helping behaviors, but not strictly helping, just any type of interactions. Approach behaviors. Approach is the opposite of avoidance. Whenever you feel like going close to others or sharing good time rather than avoiding them or moving away from others, moving towards others is approach. So whenever you have those type of feelings or you show those type of behaviors, definitely oxytocin levels will be above normal in your body. However, again, the picture is not that simple. This is generalized that oxytocin will generally help you to bond with others. But at times, this very oxytocin can also uh, be released when you're engaging in some type of what we can call antisocial behaviors. Sometimes oxytocin can also make you envious of others, jealous of them. It can also make you risk averse, like actually move away or avoid strangers, doubt their intentions towards you, so you'd like to stay away to avoid risk. That's known as risk aversion. Or it can even make you hostile towards others, like feel angry towards them, have some passive aggression towards them. As they're saying, this is towards strangers. So the social bonding, going close, that is typically towards close people in your life. These type of antisocial behaviors will be towards strangers, not towards close people, and under certain conditions. Human behavior is very complex. This is something very important you need to know for A2 also, because there you have the issue of reductionism versus holism. Human behaviors are very complex and multi-determined. Many factors determine any single behavior that you're doing. So when you're interacting with others, oxytocin is not the only thing which is determining how you would interact with someone else. There is, like we've seen, empathy also. There are many other such factors. What type of a relation you share with them, cultural norms, all those things we've seen before. So that's why when oxytocin is impacting social behavior, there are many factors which are coming in between, which are mediating or moderating to what extent oxytocin will influence that behavior, whether it will have any significant impact or not, and what type of impact it will have. A simple example which is relevant to this study is oxytocin can be released in the brains of those who are high on empathy also, and it can release in the brains of those who are low on empathy also. So will they both behave in the same way when oxytocin is released? Like, will both of these types of people want to come close to others when oxytocin is released? That is the question. So empathy is going to moderate what impact oxytocin has. Whether oxytocin will bring us closer to people or take us further away from them can depend on whether we are high or low on empathy. That's why these researchers are considering both factors. Their primary interest is in how oxytocin influences social behavior, but they know that is going to get moderated by empathy. That's why they've taken that also into account. I'll quickly summarize what we have seen here, and I will reiterate something, which is that when they ask you psychology investigated in the paper, strictly you have to follow the outline I've given below. I have explained to you many other things so that you understand well. Those are not to be included in the answer. So, firstly, you have to describe interpersonal distance, which is the space that a person likes to maintain between themselves and others. Then you need to be able to name each of Hall's four zones and explain very simply in a line what each of them are. Then you have to be able to define empathy, which is being able to see things from other people's perspectives. Then you have to be able to define two types of empathy: cognitive, which is being able to recognize what the other person is feeling. In last year, or sorry, not last year, this year only in Baron Cohen, you've seen it as the first stage of theory of mind. And affective empathy, which is being able to experience the same emotion as the other person. Then there are social hormones. You need to define what oxytocin is, not what social hormones are generally. You have to name oxytocin and say this is one hormone which promotes pro-social behavior. That's why it's a social hormone. And then you need to give some examples of how it plays a role in social bonding. So you can give the examples of childbirth, breastfeeding, and you can conclude off like it is concluded here by saying that it can also, under certain conditions, make people risk averse or aversive towards strangers. Now we will go through the background of this study. As far as background is concerned, it is very less likely to be asked in the paper. In the core studies, the background which you have, it's not important for all studies, for some selective ones. Like one example which comes to my mind is the Baron Cohen study, because details about the original ICE test is generally given in the background, so it's important. Or the Holzel study, in which details about the mindfulness program or FFMQ are given in the background generally. Depends which textbook you're referring to, but generally authors include it in the background. So for those studies, background is important, not for every study. I know many students bring up the argument, one of the years there was background of some study which was asked, I don't remember which it was, does not mean they can ask you for any study. I'm not saying that you don't go through the background at all. That's why even I am including it in this video. Only what I'm trying to say is you don't need to give special effort into learning, and definitely you don't need to memorize the background for Peri at all. You just need to go through, just be familiar with it. Take that approach for Peri et al. Study. Okay, so I'll also just be explaining to you from a understanding point of view. I'm not making any outline because, like I said, I'm not encouraging you to put special effort to remember any of these concepts. Just know what they are in case they are asked. Perry et al.'s main aim is to see how oxytocin influences social behavior, that also which social behavior, interpersonal distance, which they had defined at the beginning. And they want to see how a person's empathy levels mediates this relationship between oxytocin and interpersonal distance. I've just drawn the diagram, it's according to that. So further we can just know about two concepts before we really start seeing what exactly they've done in their study. One is in the brain, there is an area which is called the amygdala. Earlier, I remember in the past syllabus, if any of you are students who are repeating and you have done the past syllabus, then you must be remembering that Canley et al. Study, in which the amygdala was the prime subject matter of the study. Amygdala is that area of your brain which is in the limbic system, emotional system. It modulates fear experiences. It helps you to feel fear. Whenever you're scared of something, say you're walking on a dark street and you hear some noise, sharp noise coming from behind you, and you get very scared. At that time, the amygdala in your brain, if we scan it, it will be in very high activity. So it is enabling you to feel scared at that time. Fear is a very important emotion, it protects you from danger. Imagine what if you were not to feel scared at a time when you hear some noise like that. Because you feel scared, you'll run away from there, or you'll take some action to protect yourself. Maybe you call somebody, or you'll try to see what that sound is. Do I need to be scared of it or not? What if you don't feel fear? You won't take any action. And what if it is actually dangerous? What if something's coming towards you that's going to injure you? You'll get injured. So it is very important for you to feel fear, and amygdala is helping you to feel fear. Now, what is the connection of all of this with interpersonal space? We had seen whenever anyone invades our personal space, like just enters it where we don't want them to be, a stranger, say, coming into intimate zone, we feel aversive. The amygdala is found to be active at this time. The amygdala makes you feel scared, it makes you feel apprehensive about why someone is coming so close, and that is then how you try to protect your personal space. So imagine a stranger is coming very close to you on the street, what would you do? You would either ask them why they're coming close, or you want them to stay away, or you just move behind at least. So the amygdala is making you feel scared, because of which you are doing some type of safety behavior. So the amygdala is important. Also, we should know that oxytocin levels are found to be high in the amygdala when we are feeling afraid. That means oxytocin is the prime neurotransmitter, the chemical which is found in the amygdala. We've just seen how oxytocin helps in social behavior. So when we are aversive towards strangers, actually oxytocin levels are high in the amygdala, which is why it is mentioned over here. What is found is, like what they have suggested here, when there's damage to the amygdala, they've done past studies on this, people who've unfortunately damaged the amygdala because of genetic diseases or some type of accident that they've undergone or something, they don't feel afraid when strangers come close to them. Their sense of personal space goes haywire, and they would allow strangers to come close to them, which is potentially very dangerous, like we were discussing. So that's why the amygdala is very important. And just like I have mentioned, oxytocin influences amygdala. So you can see concept wise, it's nothing difficult to understand. So there's no harm in reading it and being familiar with it. Like I said, chances of being asked in the paper are low, but you can just know about it. It hardly takes a few minutes to understand what they are saying here. Also, there's the social salience hypothesis. We just saw that oxytocin firstly influences sense of personal space. Secondly, not in the same way. If we are near friends, then it can make us want to come closer. And if we are near strangers, it might like take us further away from them. The question is, what is oxytocin doing then exactly? If it makes us feel friendly, then how come it doesn't make us feel friendly towards strangers? What is it contributing towards our feelings? Oxytocin is just increasing social salience, that's all. Salience means alertness or awareness. If you consider people who have high empathy, we have just seen that they are able to understand others' emotions. Now think about how are they able to do that. Of course, they do it subconsciously. It's a trait. We would say it comes naturally to them. Actually, things which seem that they come naturally are always not natural. There's a lot of brain processing which is underlying that behavior, only takes place so automatically and so quickly that we don't realize how much effort of the brain goes into it. What I mean by this is people who have high levels of empathy, they are highly perceptive to social cues. Let's take the same example. Your friend has failed in the exam, and you are someone for whom grades don't matter much, but for her, they do. So when you speak to her, when she tells you that she has scored less marks, there must be a certain tone of voice she's using. Like she's trying to be brave about it, but her voice must be lower than usual. When she speaks, her tone must be down. There must be disappointment in her face. Her eyes must be cast lower. Some expressions, body language, what we say, there must be some changes in it. Maybe the way she's holding her report card, the way she's not making eye contact with you, and the way she's speaking, the type of words that she's using, just talking very minimal, not elaborating. If she would have done well, she would have spoken a lot with you, but today she's speaking very less. These are social cues. They are like small hints in the form of expressions, micro expressions, body language, tone of voice, what another person is experiencing. So, people who are high on empathy, now we won't get into why, they are very sensitive to these social cues. They can simply like pick up these cues very quickly and identify what the emotion is of the other person. Conversely, people who are low on empathy, they are less perceptive to these type of social cues. They are not very sensitive to what others are expressing through their body language. Unless someone tells them very directly what they're feeling, they are not able to understand. So what oxytocin does is it just enhances the social cues that are present around us. So that's what they've mentioned here. That is what this hypothesis is, just any explanation or theory. So this theory is telling us it heightens awareness of social cues. So when you're interacting with somebody, their expressions, tone of voice, and all will become more prominent to you. You'll become more alert towards it when you are having oxytocin being released in your brain. So let's say, for example, there's a friend in front of you. A friend will generally have friendly gestures towards you. The expressions towards you are warmth. They speak to you in a familiar tone, like the way of talking is like very free, very casual. But if there's a stranger in front of you, they would also hesitate because you're also a stranger to them. So how do they talk to you? With some hesitation. They are warm, they are not as warm towards you, they are more cold towards you because they don't know you so well. So you just become more aware of these cues. So when it's a friend, you would become more aware of their friendliness as such. And when it's a stranger, you become more aware of the fact that they're a stranger and you don't know them well when you are under the influence of oxytocin. So that's why in one social setting, you might feel more at ease. With your friend, anyways, you feel easy because oxytocin is enhancing that friendliness. You feel even easier when oxytocin is being released. But when you're with a stranger, their strangeness from you, that is the lack of familiarity with you, is becoming enhanced because of oxytocin, which is why you'd feel more stressed than you usually do with a stranger because oxytocin is being released. So now you can see how it is having a dual effect. With a friend, it's enhancing feeling of friendliness. That's why you're feeling closer. And with a stranger, it's enhancing feelings of strangeness. That's why you're feeling distant from the stranger. That's now it helps us to understand why in all cases it will not make you feel pro-social or friendly. Of course, again, it's mediated by empathy, like I have explained before. A person who's high on empathy, they will become even more closer to friends because anyways they are good at perceiving social cues, so their senses further heightened when oxytocin is released. And from strangers, again, further heightened, they want to be even further away. People who are low on empathy, not very so sensitive to social cues, for them it won't have exactly this impact. Like even if oxytocin is released, because their base levels of identifying social cues are not very good, so it won't have that much of an impact on them as it has on people who are high on empathy. More about this we get in the procedure of the study when they've actually hypothesized what they're expecting from the two groups. So right now I'm not getting more into it, and another follow-up video in which I'll discuss the procedure. So the hypothesis broadly which they are testing is that oxytocin can intensify or enhance someone's usual social response to the situation. If a person feels safe, basically in the presence of friends, close people, they feel even safer under the influence of oxytocin. So it'll be amplified or increased. And if they feel threatened, like in the presence of a stranger, that fear will get heightened. They feel even more scared in the presence of a stranger. So, like I said, a few minutes of understanding of the background is all. No need to give any special time preparing this as such for the paper. In the psychology being investigated, which is mentioned in the syllabus, social salience hypothesis has not been given under psychology investigated. Okay, now we will move towards answer writing practice from this session. Even in my classes, that is what I do. First, we do a section of the study, do some answer writing, then the next section, then answer writing, because otherwise, there's no equilibrium or balance between learning and writing answers. I don't like to leave answers for the end. I think I mentioned this in many of my videos. Just keep on doing all the studies and then do the answers. That's not a good approach. From time to time, you should keep on doing answer writing also, because after all, understanding is not what your examiner is going to get from your head. You have understood or not the concepts. If you're able to put it in answers, then the examiner will know that you've understood. So when you practice answers very regularly, then only you're able to get the hang of answer writing, like knowing the correct skills to write your answers. So it's very important to do it from time to time. Okay, so now we'll move towards answers for psychology being investigated. Okay, the first question is a practice question. Describe what is meant by the term empathy. We've just seen the definition of empathy. As I had said, psychology being investigated is going to come for describe type of questions, AO1. You will have to define empathy for sure. The first point they're going to look out for is definition. Now, in different textbooks, you must have learned different definitions. You can write in your own words. Like there's no rule that you have to memorize only and write. But make sure you're using good terminology whenever you define any concept in the paper, like for any question. This is a rule you need to follow in AS and in A2. You always give definition with good wording. Don't give very casual definition. Like I'll give one example. Some students will write, when I know what another person is feeling, that is empathy. Firstly, use of personal pronouns like I and you in the paper is not appropriate. Many students will write that also. When you understand what another person is feeling, that's empathy. Please avoid using this type of language. Please use formal language. Many students recently have been asking me this question, why do they insist on essay format in the paper? I know I'm deviating a little, but this is important. Why do they insist on essay format in the paper? When I can just write down everything in bullet points, one after the other, especially for designer study. Why don't they let me do that? Because writing skills are very important in psychology. You personally might not want to pursue a career in psychology, but those who intend to take it seriously and take it further, report writing is an integral skill in psychology, as is essay writing. So whether you want to do research in future, you want to develop theories, or you just want to read them, you don't want to do them yourselves, If you don't know about essay writing, critical thinking and writing, how are you going to write or read any research work in the future? If this is your habit of, putting things in bullet points and all, it's very convenient for you to write, but you're not developing writing skills by using that strategy. So you have to have good writing skills if you want to go further in psychology. They're going to teach you from that point of view, only from a long term point of view. So when they ask you to define any concept, it's not that writing skills are just for essay questions. Only for 10 markers I will write well, other places I will write anyhow. Don't have that approach. Write every answer in good terminology so that you get the habit. That will only help you in 10 markers also. Otherwise, now you're going to write anyhow, you will inevitably end up writing the 10 marker also anyhow. So don't write things like I understand people, you understand people. And what is people? When I understand people, it is empathy. That's not what empathy is. Perspective of someone, when you understand, that is empathy. So words, what is good terminology? Words like perspective. When you say something like I understand people, what about people? There's so many aspects to people. What are you talking about? Everything is empathy. Understanding anything about anyone is empathy? No. So don't give very generalized answers, be very specific. If you're not good with terminology, firstly, that shows you're not reading enough, because when you read the textbook properly and all, it cannot be that that terminology is not getting registered in your mind. So read more. Secondly, if you're not good with terminology, then initially at least memorize definitions, learn them word to word for the key concepts like empathy and all, and write exactly that way what you've learned in the textbook. That's better than writing I, you, and all that. And then slowly, as you keep on doing this, there will come a point when on your own you're able to use good terms and define concepts, when you won't have to memorize them anymore. So either if you're good with terminology, use that in your answers, or memorize and write. Especially definitions, do not write in loose language. So one, we will define empathy. That's going to be our first point. Before writing any answer, very quickly, it just takes a few seconds or milliseconds in your mind, outline what you're going to write. So think of, first I have to give the definition. Next, you have to give elaboration. Any two marker describe question anywhere that is in any paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, wherever it is there. The structure is going to be the same. 1 mark is going to be definition or description of the concept. Second is going to be any detail. What they mean by detail is either you give some elaboration. So you can say what are the two types of empathy, or you can just name them. There's cognitive and affective empathy. Even better if you can just define each in a few words, or you can give any example. Even that is considered as detail. Can be from Perry et al. If you've done, because when you're writing the paper, by then you've done the whole study. So you can give an example such as in Perry et al., people who are high on empathy were the ones who wanted to be even closer to their friend under the influence of oxytocin. That is acceptable. Or you can give a general example also what empathy is. Like I had shared one example of uh, empathizing with your friend when she hasn't done well in the exam. Even that counts over here, because they're just asking you general concept as such what empathy is. If they wanted specifically from Perry et al., they would have mentioned giving one example from Perry et al. They haven't said that, so it's up to you whether you want to give an example from the study or not. There are other ways of providing detail also, as I've shared. I'm going to write a sample answer for this. Sample answer is a sample answer. It is not to be rote learned or written exactly. You can have your own way of writing the answer. This is just an example of how you can write, because I know students like to see an example in front of them that helps them understand better how they're supposed to write. So just from that point of view, I'm writing it. Write in proper sentences. Write with good terminology. That's a general rule for all answers. So how I would write is, empathy is the ability to understand the perspective of another individual It can be cognitive, that is, recognizing another's emotion, or affective, which is experiencing the same emotion as the other. Whenever you have an exemplar answer in front of you, be it my answer, be it some textbook answer which the author has written, be it some past student's answer, or the candidate answers which are released by the board, whenever you're looking at any exemplar answer, how you have to look at it is not that I have to memorize this answer. No. You have to look at it as how it's structured, what is the terminology used, what is the style of writing, the what, more than the what, the how is what you have to focus on. Look at it from a how perspective, not the content. What the content is, I need to take in. No. How has this answer been written? So, in this answer, what you need to focus on, what is the first line, what's the second line? So, first line is definition. Always like decode or break down the answer which is in front of you, because in Cambridge, any international curriculum, they don't expect you to rote learn and write answers, so memorizing is not serving any purpose. They are not going to give the same question which they've given in past papers. Questions always going to be novel. So when you take the structure, you learn that, so you decode the structure, that will help you to write your answers regardless of which question is asked. So first you see, okay, first definition is given, then the two types outlined briefly. So this is what you notice first. Besides that, what you notice is use of terminology. Words like perspective, cognitive, emotion, affective, those type of terms have been used. This is what counts as psychological terminology. This makes it look like a psychology student has written an answer. If instead of this, I understand others, I can think like the other person, I can feel like the other person, doesn't look like a psychology student has written the answer who's like familiar with psychological terminology. Doesn't appear that way. And also you can see it's 2 marks. There are two unique points. One more mistake which comes to my mind is many students have the habit of repeating the same sentence which you have written first in other words. That is counted as repetition while marking the answers, and it does not receive credit. So if I say empathy is the ability to understand the perspective of another individual, it is being able to put oneself in other person's shoes. That is just repetition of the same thing. It will not count as a unique point. So I know many teachers will tell you have to write 2 points in the paper for 2 marks, which is correct. But the emphasis should be on you have to write two unique points. The first point and the second point should not be the same, or they should not match each other, just written in different words. The second point should extend the first, introduce something new, what was not there in the first point, or it should be an example which helps to understand better. So, making it specific to a situation and explaining it in that sense. Let's look at the next practice question. Describe the psychology being investigated in the study by Perry et al. This is for 4 marks. This I am not going to write the answer because I have already narrated the answer and I made the outline and everything. So following that outline, we have to write the answer. I'll just speak it out very quickly. For 4 marks, what we need to cover is all the three concepts which are under psychology being investigated. If you feel I'll write 4 sentences on empathy, I'll write 4 sentences on oxytocin. No. Three concepts are there which you have to define, and they've asked you the whole psychology being investigated. They haven't told you only social hormones or only interpersonal space. That means you have to describe the entire psychology being investigated, all the three concepts which are there. So, how you would write the answer, like I've given in the outline, I'm just repeating in proper terms. First, you will say interpersonal space is the personal space or the distance that people like to maintain between themselves and others. Hall has given a theory of zones of personal space in which he has defined first, intimate zone in which close others are allowed to enter. Second, personal space in which acquaintances are allowed to enter for informal interaction. Third, social space, social distance in which people from for formal interaction are allowed to enter. And finally, public distance, which is maintained from public figures, which is the maximum amount of distance. So something like that in your own words you can explain. Then coming to, you need to define empathy, which we have just defined, and explain what cognitive and affective empathy. So those same two sentences you can write. And finally, you need to write oxytocin is a social hormone which is found to promote social behavior in social bonding behaviors such as breastfeeding, child delivery, and it is also found to vary its contribution depending on the situation. For example, in the presence of strangers, it can promote envy, hostility, and risk aversion. So, this is what you need to write. What was there in the first section? That is what you have to write for this answer. Okay, next is a little different question. Explain why this study is from social approach. These type of answers, why any studies from which approach, first you should be able to give an assumption of that approach and then be able to point out how that assumption is being met in this study. So you have to link the assumption to the study. Many times, very often in the paper, this question is asked in terms of how one result of the study proves that the study is from the approach. That's a very different type of question. That comes later after we've seen the procedure. So right now I'm not discussing that, but I want you to know that's a different question because that requires you to explicitly link some data which is found from the study with the assumption which has been given. Here they're asking you from psychology being investigated. The wording of the question is just why the studies from social approach, not give one result or one piece of evidence which shows it's from the social approach. So we just have to link the base concepts which we have learned with the assumption. I'll straight off start writing this answer and then I will explain also why I'm writing it that way. One assumption of the social approach is that again depends from which textbook you have learned. The wording can be a little different, but what you can write is behaviors of individuals are influenced by the actual, imagined or implied presence of others. Okay, so this is the assumption. First, I give that in general, I get 1 mark for it. Now, very important, most important is to link Perry et al. Study. So, what I have to think in my mind is which behavior is there in this study. So, what behavior are we talking about? And what presence of others? Who are the others who are present, or what is that presence which is influencing this behavior? So, first of all, the behavior which is being studied in Perry et al. Is interpersonal distance. We have seen that right at the beginning. And is it getting influenced by presence of others? Yes. The we haven't seen the study yet, but in the study it's the implied presence. Anyways, we don't need to specify which type of presence, but the presence of a friend or a stranger, like we were seeing throughout the introduction, does influence how much interpersonal space we like to maintain from them. So that goes to prove the assumption. In Perry et al. Study, how the behavior of maintaining interpersonal distance is influenced by the presence of friends, strangers, etc., is investigated. Because we saw that what type of a relationship we share with the other person determines how much distance we'd like to maintain from them. It's a 2 marks question, there's no need for further elaboration. I know there are other ways of answering which can be briefer. So you might be thinking of, okay, I don't need to give the assumption. That's why in the beginning only I've told you this is one way of writing answers. These are model answers. These are not mandatory answers that you have to rewrite this way. From our years of experience as teachers, we've been teaching from so many years, we've understood what is the best way in which students can write, where they're the least likely to make mistakes. So we always recommend that approach. That's why we suggested to you there's no hard and fast rule that you have to write that way. So there are other ways of writing. You can directly say that they've looked into how presence of friends or strangers can influence personal distance. And because it's about interpersonal relationships, so it is from the social approach. Yes, that is also absolutely fine. But when students write those type of answers, they are not very explicit in what they are linking with what. Like clarity is severely deficient in those type of answers. These type of answers they write more clearly because they see a structure to it. Okay, I have to specify the assumption and then I have to link. That's why we recommend this approach. Okay, let's look at the next question. Okay, very simple question, paper 2 type. A psychologist is investigating people's preferred interpersonal space on public transport. Suggest how you could operationalize personal space in this study. There are 2 rules for operationalization. First, operationalization by definition is how you would measure something. So you have to specify the measurement. And the second rule, which is like not a separate point, but which you have to keep in mind while writing, is you have to be as specific and explicit as possible. Nothing should be left to imagination. So first imagine in your mind, this is paper 2, you have to take a slightly different approach. Say you are in public transport, you are in a bus or a train, and you want to maintain distance from others. What would you do? So possible things which come to my mind, like what behaviors you could do. One is you could try to impose a barrier between yourself and others. So many times you must have noticed you just place a purse or a handbag between yourself and the other person, so that it's kind of a symbolic gesture you're making that don't cross that space, don't come that close to me, this bag is between us. Or you could, if someone's coming too close, try to change your seat, go and sit somewhere else, or just move away, like get up and just walk off from there. Or you could just be found, shifting away, like moving back and forth, depending on how close a person is coming to you. So now, as a researcher, now you've thought about how you would maintain personal space. Now, as a researcher, if you want to see how others are maintaining personal space, you could do something similar. You could observe whether they are imposing barriers between themselves and others, before, whether they are moving away, whether they are shifting seats. You could observe all of those things. Only one thing is there, when you're writing, like I said, you have to be explicit and specific. So when you're measuring, if you say I will see whether they are moving away, there's no clarity in that. I mean, what are you seeing about moving away? So are you going to measure like how many footsteps they are moving away? That is specific. Then we understand, okay, you're going to count how many footsteps they've taken to move away. So exactly what's your measurement you need to specify. Or if they're imposing a barrier, you're going to see, say, the thickness of the barrier which they're imposing, like how big an item they choose to keep between themselves and others. That way you have to be as specific as possible. Means when the reader is reading your answer, the examiner is reading, there should be no doubt in their mind about how you're going to do it. So when you say something like moving away or walking away, how are you seeing or what are you seeing, that question comes. You have to write it so specifically that that question shouldn't arise. One more thing is, operationalization is not always about observation of behavior. That's the most obvious thing we would do in such a situation, so it has come to my mind. Other possible operationalizations can involve making people answer some questions. So it can be self-report. You go to a bus or train and ask people, how much distance do you like to maintain from others, and give them some options like a closed question or even an open question can be there. That's fine. or you can do some type of physiological measurement. That's one more way, but it's very going to be very odd for this type of a situation, but still, like you make people wear some heart monitor or something and you measure their heartbeat, and from that somehow you conclude how much distance they want. That is possible. Right now, to me, observation seems to be the most sensible approach that can be taken here. It's just for 1 mark. I've done a little brainstorming and given you possibilities, but ultimately you have to answer in one sentence. Okay, so how we would write this answer is, you can write it could be operationalized as, or you can give a direct answer also. I would write it could be operationalized as number of steps moved away from an approaching individual. That's all. You can just see. Sometimes we also call it statistical definition, in the sense there's a frequency that's involved. It's understood we are counting something. Instead of this, some type of mean, percentage, whatever you're calculating should be there, ideally in operationalization. The next question is, suggest one advantage of using self-report questionnaire to measure empathy. Actually, this question, ideally it should be after we have familiarized ourselves with the interpersonal reactivity index, which has been used in this study. Right now, let's just take it as a paper 2 question, because they're not explicitly telling us to give a strength of the IRI as such. So generally, if we use a questionnaire to measure empathy, what would be a strength? We'll take it in that sense. Strength of self report is always when you're measuring something which is within an individual. It's best to ask them directly, because by observing behaviors, you can only indirectly know and you can just estimate whether there is something inside them. I'll just give you an example. Supposing I am seeing a person is helping poor people, supposing they're donating money to poor people, I will assume that that is because they're high on empathy. They can experience the other person's emotions, and that is why, because of their understanding, they are lending money, so they're giving money to them. But that is always going to be an assumption. I'll never know it is true or not. Are they really feeling for that person, or is there some other reason? Like, one other possible reason is to do some type of ritual which they feel absolves them of their sins. That is why they are donating to another person. So not necessarily they are doing it because of empathy. Empathy is something that's within the person. Like we saw, it's about how they feel and think towards others. It's best to ask the person directly whether they have it within them or not, because inferring it indirectly can lead to incorrect conclusions. So that's why self report can be very helpful to increase validity or accuracy of what we're estimating. No doubt on self report also, I know you will say they can lie, they can show social desirability. When they have no empathy, still they can claim to have a lot of empathy. Definitely, all that is true. But right now, they're not asking for the disadvantage. Even if we say there's social desirability, that does not change the fact that if we try to indirectly estimate it, we can come to incorrect conclusions. So, self report is helping to get rid of those issues. So, we have to take it from that perspective. Okay, so let's write answer. Actually, it's answer 5. I've done some problem mistake in the numbering. But anyways, I know it's a video, you're going along with me, so you're able to understand which questions I'm answering. So we wrote 1, 3, 4, and now we are writing the fifth answer. I hope you're writing with me. I forgot to mention earlier. But watching lessons like movies and just going on watching is of no use. It does not help you to learn anything. You should be putting your effort. Ideally, if you could just pause before I write the answer, write yours and cross check with mine, that's the best approach, or at least write what I'm writing. Give yourself the practice. Writing versus just seeing is totally different. Writing will help you to learn. Okay, so here we can write an answer like, I think it was for 2 marks, I'll just check here. Self report can increase validity of measurement of empathy So just look at the how I'm writing the answer. First, I'm just identifying the strength which is there. I've just named it. That validity is the strength. Of course, next is going to be detailing and it's going to be justification. Whenever it's AO3 type of question, strength or weakness for 2 marks, justification is the most important thing. Sometimes even if you're not identified and written explicitly, though you should, that validity, reliability, what is increased or decreased. If your justification is good, you still get 2 marks. But no justification, just saying it's more valid, it's more accurate, shows you don't know anything, shows that you have just either generically learned what is good about self report and you're throwing that in, or you don't really know how it connects with the study. So, not a good way of writing an answer. Justification is key, which should come in the next sentence. Being very specific to empathy, using the word empathy, contextualizing to it, you have to explain why self report is helpful with respect to empathy, particularly. I'm really emphasizing on this because this is the only thing which can get you 2 marks. Empathy is a personal trait within an individual which they can best directly report as experienced by them. How students will give generic justifications? It's good to measure directly. Why? No one's. So empathy is good to measure directly. Why? Because in self-report under research methods, we learn that self-report is best when we have to measure something directly. So we have just written that. We don't care what is asked in the question. We don't care that they've asked specifically about empathy. We are going to write generally whatever we have learned. That is the reason why most students get only 50% marks in psychology. Because none of the answers are contextualized, none of the answers are specific to the question. It seems like we don't care what the question is. We have learned some answer, we are going to write that. Why empathy should be measured directly? That is what you have to. Because empathy is a personal trait, because it's within the person, because they are the ones who are experiencing it. That is why they can only tell us whether it is there inside them or not. That is what you have to bring about in your answer. So for 2 marks, these type of AO3 questions, you have a identification of the strength or weakness and a justification very specifically to what has been asked. Finally, this is a past paper question and the last question we are going to take up today. What is meant by interpersonal distance or personal space? Very direct question from psychology being investigated and very similar to the first question that we have seen. So first we are going to give a definition of what interpersonal space is, and then we are going to provide detail. Detail can be either an example of personal space or any example from Hall's theory, or it can even be the purpose of why the concept of interpersonal space is important. Any of these things, relevant things for elaboration. What I mean by relevant is if you're going to link this to empathy or something, that is not relevant. So what you've seen within interpersonal space, that is what you can write. Okay, so first I'll give the definition. Interpersonal space refers to the distance people like to maintain between themselves and others. Two things I would like to point out over here. One, I have used the word distance. If you say interpersonal space is the interpersonal space that people like to maintain, or interpersonal space is the uh, what do you say, personal space that people like to maintain from others. Whenever the word that the concept that you're defining, you use it in the definition as well. It's known as a circular definition. You are not to write, if you look at the generic marking principles in the mark scheme, which are applicable to all answers, tautological definitions have been very strongly discouraged in the mark scheme. So circular definitions are type of tautological definitions. Another example is if they're asking you to define empathy And instead of saying it's the ability to see someone's perspective, you say empathy is the empathy that someone has towards others. Empathy is the empathetic understanding that people have towards others. You cannot use the term that you're defining in its definition. Okay, so don't use that same word again in the definition. Second thing is, again, I want you to see it is repetitive, but I want to keep on insisting till you learn not to write that way, because this is very commonly done by students. Interpersonal space that you like to maintain between yourself, and interpersonal distance that I like to maintain between myself and others. I'm not saying it's absolutely wrong, but that's a very poor way of writing. Writing always has to be formal and in third person. Stop using personal pronouns while writing. So write about people, individuals in general, talk about, and of course it's a concept that doesn't apply only to you and me. So why not bring about that in the answer? Okay, so again, and you can notice the terminology and all that has been used. Word like distance is there, maintaining is there, good words should be used. Now coming to elaboration, I have many options. I will not write a repetitive second sentence. I'll not just change the wording and write, oh, it's a personal boundary that people maintain between themselves and others. That will be the same point. What we saw earlier is we have to give unique points. So I will talk about the factors on which interpersonal space is generally contingent. So that I will take as a detail point. It depends on, I'm going to write it very simply. It depends on the cultural norms, relationships shared with others, and personal preferences of the individual. Similar to what I had said in the first answer, yes, you can have an example from Perry et al. But keep in mind one thing, whenever they ask you for the concept, so they've really put in quotes and highlighted interpersonal distance. If you're only going to explain how that concept played out in the study or how it was included in the study, maximum you can get 50% marks. In the sense, in a 2-marker, you can get 1 mark. You will not get more than that, because they are looking for a general definition of the concept. That's why they've asked you the concept and not how interpersonal space was implemented in Perry et al. That's not the question that they have asked you. So if you just, your whole answer is only that interpersonal space was, say, the distance between the protagonist and the stick figure. I forgot the, what is the protagonist and the, sorry, not the stick figure, protagonist and the approaching figure in the CID paradigm. If that is going to be your answer, and that's the only thing that you're going to write, then you're going to get 1 mark out of 2. No matter how much you elaborate on it or how much details you give, your general definition should be the starting point. That you can take as an example. So after writing this sentence, if you want, you can say that in the Perry et al. Study, the distance between the central figure and the protagonist was the interpersonal distance that was preferred by the participant. Yes, you can say that, but only as an example, or only as a second point, not as the chief point in your answer, or not as the only point in your answer. So this is some example of answer writing. I do not intend to upload this on my website. So if you want, you can take a screenshot right here and save the answers for further reference. That's it for this video. I will upload a procedure video soon, hopefully, but it's going to be long because there are 2 experiments in Perry et al. So I'll be able to upload when I have a lot of time, and maybe I'll have to break it down into 2 or 3 videos. You can give me suggestions in the comments box below of what you would like to see further, or any doubts that you have about this video. You can write in the comments box below. I do read your comments and I do reply to comments which are relevant. Also, if you want to contact me for tuition, or you're looking for classes in psychology, I do take private tuition. You can contact me on my phone number or email ID, which I've given below. The phone number and email ID is only for tuition inquiry. If you're going to call me and ask me to make certain videos, or you know ask me questions about what I've explained in the video. I'm making it very clear to you. I'm not going to answer those type of questions. That's why the comments box is open to you to ask those type of questions. So if you reach out to me using the correct platform, you'll get an answer from me, not otherwise. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll try to upload another video soon. You can watch my other videos in the meanwhile. There are many videos, CIE videos on my channel. You can go to the playlist section and select the CIE place. If you're on the CIE channel only, all the videos should be relevant to you. Most students look out for answer writing. So lots of answer writing, past paper solving videos are there on my channel. So keep preparing well for your exams. Don't take psychology lightly. It's not a subject about rote learning. It's a subject about understanding, critical thinking, and good answer writing. So prepare accordingly, and I'll see you in another video soon. Goodbye.